Hi, you're listening to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast produced by the Get Global Network. Hi, and welcome to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. Thank you for subscribing to my podcast, and be sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, SGT, the abbreviation for Sergeant, SGT Cheryl Dorsey on Instagram and Twitter, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel, SGT Dorsey Speaks, much like my podcast. I'm a retired 20-year veteran sergeant in the Los Angeles Police Department, and I'll be providing you with an insider's perspective on police policy, police culture, and police training. I'll pull the covers back, expose that thin blue line, and decipher police code talk when we hear it. I'll also be discussing incidents that are making national headlines and how you might get involved and engaged in your particular communities. Also, I'll be offering solutions on how best to survive police encounters, because at the end of the day, the goal is for everyone to go home safe. For more about me and my career, visit my website, www.sgtcheryldorsey.com, for information about my advocacy work, as well as my 20-year career, which is chronicled in my autobiography, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate. I talk about in great detail my 20-year career on the LAPD, where I worked in patrol my entire career under the command of police chiefs Daryl Francis Gates, Willie Williams, and Bernard Parks. I talk about real life encounters and adventures, if you will, during my 20-year career. I name names in some instances, and in others I use pseudonyms and aliases that I like to give folks. You'll be able to tell exactly who it is that I'm talking about based on the circumstances when I use an alias. And for those of you who'd like a sneak peek, on my website, www.sgtcheryldorsey.com, you can read the first chapter of Volume 2, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate, as well as my next to be released book, Volume 3 in the Black and Blue series, Black and Blue, Creation of a Whistleblower. Let's get to it. Welcome to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. So I have been on a very much needed sabbatical, a little mental health break, if you will. And so I'm back, and let me just say happy pre-4th of July. What will you guys be doing this holiday? I'm guessing not much, right? Because folks didn't want to sit down and sit still for this whole COVID-19 situation, and states began to open prematurely, allowing folks back on the beach and in bars and restaurants. And I think the gym just opened here in California on last week. And guess what? Now they're starting to shut down again. Why? Well, because there are spikes all over the country. So I hope everyone is continuing, even though things may be opening, to practice safe social distancing. I know that there are places where masks are actually outlawed, if you could imagine that. I think it was, I can't remember what state it is. The governor said that they couldn't, North Dakota, and North Dakota is off the chain right now with an uptick in COVID infections, because there's some sort of a Tyson plant there where they process beef, I believe. And the governor is not allowing folks in the courthouse to wear masks. They were trying to keep people safe. It's a very small courthouse, and they were trying to keep people safe by saying, if you come into the courthouse, you're going to have to wear a mask. And the governor's like, nope, he's a Republican governor. So I don't know how that's going to work. But listen, even though it may not be required wherever you may be, I hope that everyone is continuing to mask up, because it's believed that wearing a mask does reduce the risk of becoming infected. So anyway, I don't think this thing is going away anytime soon. And I've said that before. Not sure if I said it here on my podcast, but I've certainly said it on my other social media platforms. And to be quite honest with you, family, I'm just going to have to say I kind of need this to stick around for just a little bit more, because listen, if this stuff goes away, anytime soon, the person who's in the White House will pretend like somehow he had a part to play in things being better. And because we all have short-term memory, we'll forget just how miserable and bad it was, how many lives were actually lost. And listen, it's a big deal when the EU and other countries are forbidding Americans from even traveling there. I mean, China can go to the EU under certain conditions, and Americans right now are not allowed to travel. This is bad, all bad, and I don't see it getting any better anytime soon. So for that and everything else that's been going on with continued protests and faux police reform across the country regarding the murder of George Floyd, followed up a few days later by the murder of Rayshard Brooks. It's a lot going on, and it's a lot to talk about. And so I'm just going to jump right into it. And listen, you know, as I talk about this faux police reform, because I think everyone is being intellectually dishonest, all of them. And I've said before that street troopers, ground pounders, patrol officers, one of which I was for 20 years, so I know what I know, are not affected by whatever they do over there in those ivory towers. Whatever mayors say and police chiefs and sheriffs and commissioners, whatever these young people get them to admit to doing with regards to defunding the police and moving money around, that stuff has no bearing on what patrol officers do once they get inside their black and white every day. No bearing. And we know this to be true because there continues to be videos of officer-involved shootings, videos of police officers taking folks into custody with a knee on the neck, men and women. And so all of this stuff about we're going to hold, well, they're not really saying we're going to hold police officers accountable. That's the one word I've been waiting to hear. But we're going to defund the police. We're going to come up with new policies and procedures, everything but accountability. And so to that end, there was a shooting on April the 22nd of this year in Newton Division. That's an LAPD patrol division. And this shooting involved a female officer by the name of Toni McBride. Now, Toni McBride is a P2. Don't know how much time she has on the job. Her serial number is 43335, which, you know, when I came on, my serial number was 22607. And the old timers used to say, "What's that, your social security number?" So I have no idea what a 43335 serial number means in terms of seniority, but she's a P2, which means that's the rank that you're promoted to once you get out of the police academy. When you start on the LAPD, you start as a police officer 1. Once you get off probation, that's 18 months, you're automatically promoted to police officer 2. Everything after that, you have to take a test and an oral interview to attain rank. So she's a P2 dog. That's what we call them. P2 dog, working Newton Division. And she got into an officer-involved shooting. And what happened was there was a traffic accident. And there was a gentleman who was involved in this traffic accident. I think he was the cause of it, who was reported by folks who had called into 911 saying, "This guy is sitting in his car with a knife and he's killing himself," is what the audio 911 call said. And the dispatcher was trying to find out, what do you mean he's killing himself? And one of the ladies said, he's cutting himself. So police officers responded, not necessarily to the radio call. They just happened to be in the area and they came up on this traffic collision. So they get out, they see folks, and then while they're attending to people who were involved in the traffic collision, they see the actual, quote, suspect, the person who caused the collision, male Hispanic. He has not been identified, and he's walking in the direction of the police officers. Now, this video is available on YouTube if you want to view it. It's Newton, NEWTONOIS, officer involved shooting, and the date was 4/22/20. So you could certainly Google it. They have a critical incident where they explain in detail and show the video of the shooting. You can take a look at it and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But what happened is this young man got out of his car with a box cutter in his right hand. His right hand is down at his the side of his body near his leg, thigh area. And he's walking in the direction of the officers. As he walks in the direction of the officers, you can hear them now directing folks who are in their cars and nearby, who are just witnessing and observing what's going on, to get out of the way, get out of the area, move, because they're anticipating that there's going to be an officer-involved shooting. And the suspect walks. Now, when you read the comments, the narrative that the police department is putting forth, of course, they use very different verbiage, right? He's advancing towards the officer. Well, I don't know what advancing means. He's He's moving in the direction of the officer, right? Because advancing sounds like he's running up on him. He was moving at a slow pace, and he was doing what someone who may be having a mental health episode might do, or someone who's under the influence might do. He was uncooperative. He wasn't responding to the officer's command to stop, and he wasn't responding to the officer's command to drop the weapon, the box cutter that he was holding in his hand. Now, he was continuing to move in the direction of the officers. You see him take 1 or 2 steps, and then you hear 2 shots fired, and he drops. There's a pause, and then you hear 2 more shots fired. He's on the ground after the first 2. He drops. And then there's a pause, and then you hear 2 more shots. It was a total of 6 shots. 2, pause, 2 more, pause, 2 more shots. A total of 6 altogether. And so I had an opportunity to share my thoughts, if you will, with a journalist who's writing an article on this very story. That's how I came to know of it. And he was really interested in what I had to say about this particular officer-involved shooting. And so I think when everything is said and done, it's going to hinge on what the officer's perception was in terms of the threat, the perceived threat, and why the officer fired 6 rounds, because I personally had a problem with the fact that 6 rounds were fired. The officer did, in my opinion, do exactly as we're trained and taught, fired 2 rounds in rapid succession, assessed the threat. He's down. The officer fired 2 more shots in rapid succession, assessed the threat. The suspect is still down and not moving when the last 2 shots were fired. And so I'm just wondering, what was the threat? I mean, you dropped him the first time. What was the threat? I don't know what the officer is going to say, but I do know that this P2 officer, Toni, Toni McBride, is reportedly the daughter of the president of the Los Angeles Police Protective League. Now, I don't know if that's going to get her the homie hookup. That was one of the things that I shared with the journalist, because listen, while there's all these alleged independent investigations going on internally as well as outside of the department by the district attorney's office, Jackie Lacey, that office, so you already know, you can't unknow the relationship of P2, Toni McBride, to the president of the Los Angeles Police Protective League. That same Los Angeles Police Protective League who pays copious amounts of campaign monies to politicians who are running for office. And you know, Jackie Lacey is up for re-election. And you know that if you've been paying attention, for those that are here locally in Los Angeles, I do believe I have read that the Los Angeles Police Protective League is backing the re-election of Jackie Lacey. Why? Well, because Jackie Lacey, up until just a couple of weeks ago, has never prosecuted a police officer in the history of ever. Now, I'm wondering if she's prosecuting the officer who beat up Richard Castillo over in East Los Angeles, Hollenbeck Division. She's prosecuting him for that assault because, well, it was a very contentious primary and she almost didn't eke out that win. So I don't know if she's looking to get brownie points now. But this young lady, Police Officer 2, Toni McBride, is the daughter of the president of the Los Angeles Police Protective League. So we'll see what happens. This officer-involved shooting is being investigated by the Force Investigation Division. That's a unit within the Los Angeles Police Department. Once their investigation is complete, it will be reviewed by the Chief of Police, Michael Moore. It will be reviewed by the Board of Police Commissioners, our independent civilian review board, and also by the Office of the Inspector General to determine whether or not the investigation was thorough and accurate, and also whether or not the use of deadly force complied with LAPD's policies and procedures. Now, this is where it gets slippery because, listen, if the Board of Police Commissioners and the IG, for that matter, think that somehow this shooting did not align with LAPD policy and procedures with regards to the use of deadly force, Chief Michael Moore gets to say, okay, thank you. I don't know what you want me to do with that information, but thanks for sharing it with me. And he will decide what ultimately he wants to do in terms of discipline, if any, for Police Officer 2, Toni McBride, serial number 43335, daughter of president of the Los Angeles Police Protective League, our union. Representatives from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, that's Jackie Lacey's office, will also review that FID investigation, Force Investigation Division. That's what FID stands for. So Jackie Lacey's office will review their investigation and all the evidence collected and witness statements, and will make a determination again as to whether or not the use of force by the police officer was reasonable. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with this. But again, it's going to be the officer's perception with regards to the threat. Now, I don't deny that someone carrying a knife, a box cutter, any sharp instrument can certainly close the distance between themselves and an officer rather quickly if they are advancing. I would not describe what you see this man in the video doing as advancing. I would describe it as him walking in the direction of the officers, albeit at a very slow to moderate pace. He took 1, 2, maybe 3 steps, and then the first 2 shots rang out, and there was considerable distance between the two of them. Now, I would argue that officers would not want to allow him to get any closer to use less lethal taser because, I don't know the distance of a taser dart, maybe 12, 15 feet. That's too close for me if someone has a box cutter or a knife. So I understand why that wasn't an option. But if you know as you're arriving that this man is in the car, reportedly by several 911 callers trying to harm himself, then what would be going through my mind is he being uncooperative because this is a suicide by cop situation? I question the need to use deadly force at the exact moment that the officers did, given what was known to them when they arrived on scene. If this was a situation where he was being uncooperative on purpose because he was hoping to entice them into shooting him, suicide by cop, why would you rush into shooting him? He's not advancing. He took 2 or 3 steps. There was at least, and it's hard for me to really, without measuring and being there, say the distance between them, but I'm just going to say at least 2 to 3 car lengths based on the cars that were on scene. That's a good 30 plus feet, right? His 4th step could have been just him stopping, or maybe he would not have even taken another step. We don't know. Why? Because, well, when a police officer shoots and kills you, there's only one version of that incident, and that's the one that they ultimately tell. So I'll continue to monitor this and see what ultimately happens in terms of whether or not there's any disciplinary charges and whether or not there are any criminal charges for Newton Officer P2 Toni, Toni McBride, serial number 43335. Over in Washoe County, the district attorney, whose name is Chris Hicks, has announced that there was a police shooting by the Sparks Police Department and that the officers involved in that shooting were justified in the killing of Micah Lee. Micah Lee was an unarmed 18-year-old suicidal man, and this incident occurred back in January. Micah Lee's family and other local residents have been requesting an expedited investigation and a release of body cam footage involved in this particular shooting, and the Reno chapter of the NAACP is also calling for more transparency. Reno Police Chief Jason Soto, his department is the one that is in charge of this particular investigation. Now, what happened is back on January 5th, Micah Lee's mother called 911 and informed the dispatcher that her son was suicidal and that also he was armed with a handgun and threatening to kill himself or die by cop. That's the quote, die by cop. Remember, suicide by cop. It's not uncommon for folks who are having mental issues to try to do something to engage an officer that would result in the officer shooting them. And that's what Micah Lee's mom said she believed her mentally unstable son was. And she also said that he had a history of drug use. Don't know if he was on drugs that particular day. I haven't read anything that speaks to that, but she said certainly that there was a history. And so there was ultimately an officer involved shooting. Micah had been in his vehicle, and officers eventually found him. Family members had tried to prevent him from leaving the area, but he was successful in evading family members and ultimately the police. A couple of different times they had tried to trap his vehicle between a police truck and another car unsuccessfully. As they tried to block him, Micah was reportedly behind the wheel, accelerating the car, and eventually managed to free himself. At some point, the officers encountered him again, and then there was this officer-involved shooting. So, there's a lot to be said about police responding to these types of calls with a mental health official, and that's all great and good if you have the time and the luxury to request someone, have them respond, and then meet you somewhere. But when you encounter someone who's behind a vehicle, who's a moving target, if you will, it's very difficult. And who knows at the moment that you encounter someone as a driver of a vehicle that they are having some sort of a mental episode that would warrant you requesting a mental health professional. And that's why it's so important for officers to, not only rely on their training, follow their policies and procedures, but to use a little common sense, demonstrate a little empathy, a little human compassion, all of which are things I think you can't teach. I'll report more on this as I learn of new updates. Over in San Diego, there was a police shooting, and protesters are now gathering with regards to a 25-year-old Hispanic man. His name has not been released, but he was approached by police officers because he, quote, fit the description of a robbery suspect. And as a result of that officer-involved shooting, the San Diego Police Department, like many others across the nation, have come up with a three-pronged, what they're calling, quote, racial justice and law enforcement realignment policy package. Whew. Let me say that again. Racial justice and law enforcement realignment policy package. Yeah, that's a whole lot right there. And it really, in my opinion, when I tell you what these three policies are, it means nothing, because what I'm hearing from the police chief over in San Diego is the same thing that I'm hearing from the mayor in Atlanta and every other police chief and mayor, where they're under a lot of scrutiny and pressure from the community to do something, because I've said, and I'll say it again, that police departments, mayors are willing to do everything and anything except hold officers accountable. So here's what they're going to do over in San Diego with this racial justice and law enforcement realignment policy package. It involves strengthening the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board's authority and independence. Don't quite know what that means, because I know for a fact our independent civilian review board, the Los Angeles Police Commission, as strong as they are, they only make a recommendation. So in San Diego, they're going to strengthen the review board's authority and independence. Okay. The second prong of this policy is the opening of the Office of Equity and Racial Justice for San Diego County. And then the third prong is creating a mobile crisis response team that will use clinicians instead of law enforcement for mental health and homeless services. Again, all great and good when you have the time, but if you roll up on something, you stop a driver and they're having a mental health crisis, you're not going to have the luxury of waiting for a clinician to show up. So San Diego, three-prong approach. Wouldn't it be nice if the fourth prong just had to do with holding officers accountable when they don't follow those realignment policies? No one seems to have an appetite for holding officers accountable. The mayor over there, his name is Kevin Faulconer, and the police chief's name is David Nezelit, announced that they're also going to adopt two standalone policies that are designed to address community concerns about excessive use of force on the part of their officers, resulting in an unnecessary loss of life. So they're going to create this board. They're going to strengthen the civilian review board when they, get it going. And then they are going to also have a couple of other policies that are designed to address community concerns. I don't know what they mean by address community concerns, because I think what community is concerned about is officers being held accountable. I've not heard that word uttered by anyone. Over on the NYPD, it's reported that they've seen a 49% spike in officers filing for retirement amid the George Floyd unrest. And I would have to say George Floyd and Rayshard Brooks, and probably because of the 75-year-old man over in Buffalo who was shoved and had his head cracked open like a melon by 2 Buffalo PD officers who are now facing criminal charges. And so police officers are butthurt. Why would you be bothered if errant officers, those who are tarnishing the badge, are held accountable? If they are the subject of a criminal charge because they engaged in criminality, why would police officers be bothered by that? And so it speaks to what I've said all along, is that patrol cops don't care about anything other than what it is that they do and what it is that they're allowed to do. And if you stop them from clearly killing folks with impunity, somehow that hurts their feelings. And so good riddance, goodbye. 49% spike over on the NYPD. They have 272 officers who filed for retirement. They said this is a 49% increase from the same period last year, that being 2019. And this is because officers have taken issue with the department's decision to disband the anti-crime unit. Now, remember, the Commissioner Dermot Shea had said in a press conference a few weeks ago that he was disbanding this anti-crime unit. 600 officers who are allowed to roam the streets freely in plain clothes, jump out, beat folks up, take them to jail for some bullshit charge that probably in some instances is made up, manufactured, would ultimately wind up as a DA reject. But okay, so what? Who cares? They've inconvenienced you. They put you in the system. You now have a record, not a conviction, but you do have a record of arrest. And so these 600 officers are going to be in uniform now. Boo-hoo. And they're mad. So 272 officers on the NYPD in protest, allegedly, have filed for retirement. And these are folks who are eligible to retire anyway, so their asses probably need to quit clogging up the damn system and let some new blood come in there. I say anybody who's bothered by what's going on the NYPD, there's going to be a lot of openings. You need to get on. You need to join. Change will come from the inside. The judge in the matter of the George Floyd murder trial is threatening to move the case outside of Minneapolis. There's a lot of back and forth going on between the prosecutor and the defense attorneys with regards to people leaking information. The attorney representing the family has been accused of leaking information that was privileged and should not have been shared. He denies that. Each side is blaming the other for being biased in the case and putting information out there in the ethernet, if you will, for prospective jurors. And listen, the defense attorneys are no different, because they held a series, at least one of the attorneys for one of the officers, I believe it was Officer Thomas Lane's attorney, held a press conference saying that, Lane was the officer down holding Mr. Floyd's feet on the ground, putting his body weight at the lower extremities of Mr. Floyd, also preventing him from being able to move and get up and probably breathe. There were 3 people in total putting their body weight on Mr. Floyd. So Thomas Lane was one of those. And he said he had no idea what was going on up there at the neck of Mr. Floyd. He didn't know, even though Mr. Floyd was yelling and screaming, "I can't breathe, you're killing me, I'm dying." And others were coming to his aid and asking if they could render some sort of medical assistance to make sure that he was not dying. It's okay for Mr. Thomas Lane's attorney to put that out there to potential jurors. But nonetheless, the judge admonished both sides and said, knock it off, did not issue a gag order yet, but told each of them to be very careful. And so while all this is going on, it's been reported that at least 2 of the officers have been able to make bail. I think it was $750,000. That was J. Alexander King, Kueng. I'm not really sure how he pronounces that. And Thomas Lane. Those 2 were able to make bail. There were some restrictions and requirements that they have to adhere to. Officer Thao, Thao, as well as the main offender, Derek Chauvin, remain in custody. The 3 officers are charged with aiding and abetting second-degree murder and aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter. And of course, Derek Chauvin is charged with the murder of George Floyd. So we'll see if these folks are able to keep their mouth shut and if this case can stay in Minneapolis. There was also mentioned in the article that the defense attorneys were bothered by Lil Tink Tink. You know, that's the person in the White House. I don't say his name, because he had made some comments that they thought were detrimental to the defense case. I don't know if they're bothered by Lil Tink Tink making comments, and I don't even know what he would have said, because he too hasn't seen the murder of a black man, woman, or child that doesn't excite him, allegedly, seemingly, apparently. If the person who holds the highest office in the land is making statements that are detrimental to the defense, where would you move it? I don't know. Nonetheless, everybody's been ordered to stop with the inappropriate public statements, and we'll see what happens. Over in Colorado, the governor has directed officials to re-examine the death of Elijah McClain. Remember the story? I shared this on a prior YouTube video as well as my podcast with regards to Elijah McClain. That was a young man that was walking home one evening in Colorado, and he had a cap on his head. I think it was covering his face because he tends to get cold. I think his family said he is anemic, and I think he may have been listening to music in his ear and may have been partying a little bit as he was walking down the street, like kids do. And someone called and said somehow that was suspicious to them, and the police ultimately responded. They confronted Elijah McClain, and then there was a use of force. They put hands on Mr. McClain for reasons that he could not understand. He tried to question and protest the what he probably no doubt felt was racial profiling, and in the midst of all that, they wound up using force sufficient enough that they called the paramedics. Paramedics ultimately responded, and then they shot Elijah with a drug called ketamine. And I looked up ketamine when I heard it, Ketamine, and it's reportedly some sort of a tranquilizer for either a damn horse or a dog. Now, when the paramedics were asked about, why are you injecting this young man with a damn tranquilizer for an animal, they said, well, in this area, and I don't know what this area means. Is it an area where black folks live? But they said in this area, it's not uncommon for us to administer a drug like this animal tranquilizer to calm him down. Him being Elijah McClain, and I believe he ultimately suffered a heart attack and died. And so there was, a whole lot of sweeping under the rug, because the police were pointing fingers at the paramedics. Paramedics are pointing fingers at the police, and they said that they could not determine the cause of death. They didn't know if it was the animal tranquilizer or if he had some other kind of underlying condition. And then back under the rug, the whole thing went until now because of public outrage. And so, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. That's why it's so important. And I share so many stories, not to further inflame or trigger people about what's going on, but just to make you aware. And I give you names of folks who are in positions of power to do something. I name mayors and district attorneys and police chiefs, because those are the folks that you should be reaching out to. And while you may not live in Colorado, it could certainly happen in your town, in your city, in your state. And so I say it may not be you now, but you might be next. And so I think it's important that we all stand in solidarity with the McClain family, much like the families of Breonna Taylor and Mubarak Suleiman, another young man who was killed by police. And that family too is not able to get the kind of attention and traction that's needed to get a investigation expedited. I spoke about Mubarak Suleiman on my last week's podcast, so you can revisit that and hear a little bit more about that incident. But it's not uncommon, and you see it's easily done. People, short-term memory, change channels, kill someone. No one's paying attention and no one's asking but the family. It's very easy to make it go away. Over in Buffalo, there's been a special prosecutor appointed in the case involving Buffalo police officers who arrested a man by the name of Quentin Suttles. Quentin Suttles had been pulled over for a minor traffic offense, and we're in Buffalo, family, so hold on. You already know how they get down over there. Remember, 2 Buffalo PD officers right now are facing criminal charges for shoving a 75-year-old man down in the midst of protests regarding the murder of George Floyd. But Quentin Suttles was allegedly driving the wrong way on a one-way street when officers encountered him. They said they smelled marijuana, and there was ultimately some sort of a use of force. They said Mr. Suttles failed to comply, was even fighting with the officers during a pat-down search, and now there's a civil suit in addition to criminal charges that Mr. Suttles is facing. And because of that, there has been a special prosecutor appointed to sort that whole thing out. I'll keep you posted as information becomes available. Over in Dallas, Police Chief, Sister Girl, Renee Hall, has announced new policy with regards to the release of videos involving critical incidents within 72 hours. Again, here's another example of a police chief. And again, I hate black on black crime. That's a black woman, Chief Renee Hall. She's willing to release videos now within 72 hours of a critical incident. Amazing. Thank you, Chief Renee Hall. But how about a little accountability, sis? Can you just hold officers accountable when they're involved in a critical incident? I get that, folks want to see the video. That's a great first step, but I'm looking for some accountability, Chief Renee Hall. And as I ask for it, family, in Dallas, you should too. Well, there's a little update, and I knew this because I know what I know, regarding the former superintendent over in Chicago, Eddie Johnson. He left doing the walk of shame because he had allegedly fallen asleep behind the wheel of the car. He said his blood pressure, he thought was rising, and he was feeling a little ill, and officers encountered him. And you know what happens when police officers pull up and catch the damn superintendent asleep behind the wheel of a car. He gets the homie hookup. He gets, sir, are you okay? Are you going to sleep here? Or are you going to drive home? And the chief superintendent said, no, I'm good. It was a whole different situation when they encountered Rashard Brooks asleep behind the wheel. We know how that happened, right? So listen, rank has its privileges, and sometimes it has nothing to do with race. It's not what you know, it's who you know and who you are. And so Superintendent Eddie Johnson was given the homie hookup. Nobody gave him an FST. They didn't spend 40 minutes talking to him, having him look left, right, up, down. No, they let him stay in his car. And eventually, because folks can't keep a good secret, it was figured out that, well, he was a little bit more than just asleep after he had, had a, bad batch of greens. He actually had been out with his side piece. And there was videotape supporting that. Probably had been drinking. That's why he was asleep behind the wheel of his car. He's out with his side piece in a city vehicle, drunk. And rather than have to explain that, because he'd been around for a long time, he said, you know what? I don't have nothing to prove. I'm not interested in trying to change your mind and convince you of anything with regards to the veracity of what I had to say. So he just went ahead and, well, he didn't really resign because the chief told him, dude, you got to go, not now, but right now. He was going to resign. He was going to retire, actually. But before he could actually do that, the chief said, out of here. She hit the eject button. And so now I believe there's some video that supports that. And he's back in the news. That's it for now, family. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And again, as the holiday weekend approaches, I need everybody to continue to practice safe social distancing. Until next week, family, be good. Be safe.
You have been listening to the Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast, produced by the Get Global Network. Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey is a television commentator, social justice advocate, and is also well known for her book, Black and Blue, Creation of a Social Advocate, an autobiography of her 20-year career as a Black woman on the Los Angeles Police Department. The book details what she learned as an LAPD insider. Sergeant Dorsey can be contacted through her website, sgtdorseyspeaks.com. sgtdorseyspeaks.com or via any of her social media sites like YouTube and Facebook. Take the time to subscribe to her YouTube channel and also subscribe to this podcast via major podcast networks like iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and many others. The podcast is also available on wireless speaker systems like Alexa and Sonos.